Okay, well, welcome everybody here in the chamber and also at home. Have we got any apologies? No. No, not today. The minutes of the last meeting, can we have a proposer of those? That they are correct?
Yeah, with the addition that Pat mentioned before.
Yes. And a seconder on that? Thank you. Is there anybody with a declaration of interest? Okay. I believe there may be some of the general public who would like to speak. Are they here? Oh, sorry, before we do that, we've got an election of a cooperative member. Is there anybody who would like to propose a cooperative member?
What would you want me?
Would anybody like to propose a cooperative member? And would anybody like to second that? Thank you. Brilliant. So we'll go back to what I should have said. Is there any declaration of interest? Yes, we'll say that Bill Kibble has been selected as a cooperative member. And now I believe that there is somebody who would like to speak at the public forum. Shall we have Colin Unwin? Is he here? No? No. Who is the... Julian Barnett.
We are just getting to connect.
Hello, Julian. It's really good to see you. Would you like to take the floor and let us know about your concerns?
All right, okay, sorry. I didn't think it started till 7.
You've got 5 minutes.
All right, okay. Well, my main thing is I've had a letter from you lot about having cockerels on the allotment. I'm hoping that I can just keep them. They're only small cockerels. Silkies they are, and yeah, they don't make any noise. I've asked the neighbours nearby, and they said they don't hear them. I know I'm not supposed to have them, but I ended up with them because my niece's boyfriend had brought them back to her council house, and we thought they were hens. They were tiny, and they've turned into cockerels. And I don't know where I would get rid of them, and I really don't want to kill them. And I'm not breeding off them. I'm not doing anything. It's just, I'm just wondering if I can just keep them.
Thank you for that. Now, I know that we can't actually make any decisions tonight because it's not on our agenda. However, as you've stated, you know you're not supposed to have these cockerels, and obviously I think the officer is going to come and inspect the area in a month. Yes, in a month. Would you like to say anything?
Yes. Hi, Gillian. Thanks for addressing the meeting. Unfortunately, the allotment committee's policy is as you know, that cockerels aren't allowed on allotment plots. And without a resolution of this committee, which would have to be on the agenda to change that, and a willingness or agreement of the committee to do that, as an officer, can only promote what is currently the council policy, which is that if there are cockerels on an allotment site, unfortunately it is a breach of the allotment conditions. What I would suggest we do, I appreciate that you would like to keep the birds, but unfortunately it is a prohibition on cockerels on allotment sites. What I suggest we do is that I will undertake a more formal inspection in a month's time to see whether or not the cockerels are still on the site. If they were to be found still on the site, then the procedure would be that we would serve a notice of a breach of agreement, which effectively would give you 1 month in which to resolve the breach of agreement before further action was taken. If at the end of that month and on a subsequent inspection the cockerels were found to be on the site, then it would be the council's responsibility to serve a notice on the actual allotment itself. And once that notice is served, it is a fixed thing, and you would be required to give up the allotment at the end of that notice period. So if I can just clarify again that process, my intention, as I am obligated to enforce the council's policy on cockerels on allotment site, is to revisit your plot in 1 month's time. If the cockerels are still present on the site at that time, then I will arrange for a notice to be served for breach of tenancy conditions. That notice will run for a period of a further month, after which, if the cockerels are still on site, then it would be a matter of the council serving a notice to quit on the allotment. That may not be ideal, but it does give you some time to investigate further arrangements for the cockerels that you currently have.
So thank you for coming. I know that's probably not the answer that you were wanting to hear. Is Colin Unwin here? No. Okay. So, any exclusions? I'm assuming not. Allotment Awards 2021. And we're going to receive a verbal report updating the members from the allotment officer.
Yes, on the 16th of April, we informed plot holders by letter that the committee would be running the photo competition this year because of the complications of the restrictions related to the COVID pandemic. So we opened the allotment awards on the 16th of April for photographic entries in the different categories. The entries will close, or the competition will close, on the 4th of July. And to date, we've received 2 entries, but whilst I say 2 entries, they may have entered several times in different categories. I think we spoke with other people today and they seemed quite keen to put in their own photos. So we are hopeful that we will have a competition this year. We will have more entries. And as I said, the 4th of July is the final date for which entries have to be received. And then we'll go on to, shortly after that, a public judge of the best allotment photo on the council's Facebook page. And then we will award the prizes once we've got the judging panel together.
Thank you. Now, today when we went to the allotments, I did get a complaint that we weren't doing the judging of the allotments themselves. However, I don't know whether both of you are in agreement that we just do the photo competition this year because of the COVID restrictions. Yeah. I think we'll go with what the officer has said. and we'll just stick to the photography this year. So, item 9, Sutherland water supply, and again, I think we're going to get a report by our allotment officer.
This one's come back on the agenda because it seemed to drop off last year, so I thought it'd be important to recap on this one. There's been a long-standing problem with the water supply at Sutherland Street, which is supplied from a surface water stream from a tank just outside the allotment site, or just above it. The pipe has blocked periodically. I think about a year, maybe 2 years ago, Pendle Council and we undertook some additional work to solve the flooding of the site from the surface water stream by improving the overflow drainage to the tank, which has been working successfully. So that part of the system works. Unfortunately, the original pipe to the tap in the allotments has become blocked again and hasn't been working for some time. Having consulted with the contractor who originally did the improvement work to the overflow, they suggested that we install a settlement tank next to the main allotment tank. And last year we were thinking about how we might undertake that. We did get a quote for the work, but there are some issues which perhaps the committee needs to resolve before we move forward. Firstly, the tank is located on Pendle Council land, which means that we'll be doing work on land which isn't our own. Whilst at the moment the allotment land isn't technically our own, it is land which is under our management. So there's a slight difference in terms of the work that's been undertaken and where. There's also, we'll need the agreement of Pendle Council to do the work, and we'd also have to agree with them what the responsibilities would be for the ongoing maintenance and repair of the supply. Because whilst it is providing water to the allotments, it's also dealing with an issue of surface water for Pendle Borough Council. One of the trickier things will be to identify the extent of any ongoing costs associated with the installation of the additional settlement tank, because there will be standing water in the tank for long periods of time. We will have to take advice on whether or not we need to have any additional checks, procedures, and thinking particularly in relation to Legionella testing and also running of the water supply, all of which are likely to lead to some on-costs to the allotment committee and the allotment committee budgets, which prior to commencing any work or agreeing to a work, we'd have to identify what those on-costs were and also where those on-costs would come from. Those on-costs could be anything in the region from £350 to £500 per year. We don't know at this stage, but it is a significant amount to commit from the allotment committee budget, which is why it's right to identify which budget heading it's going to come out of, and how much it's likely to be on a year-by-year basis. We may also want to discuss if there is any means by which we may recoup any additional costs. Many of the other sites where water is provided pay an additional fee for the water services, which is usually based on the amount of water usage. Whilst we'll have no costs in terms of the surface water that we use because it's not metered or anything like that, it's these on-costs that would be the thing that we'd have to deal with. So we may want to investigate whether we take it up or not, whether or not it would be right and proper to look to recover some of those costs from the people using that service. Once we've identified the budget which will cover the initial work, which could be anything from £1,500 plus the on-cost, which was another £500. At present, our new equipment infrastructure budget and our repairs and maintenance budget is already quite heavily committed, just with ongoing yearly expenses. But we've also made a commitment to a project on South Valley, which means that a lot of our resources will be tied up with that. So I think what I would propose to the meeting is that really that we should look at doing, or I should look at doing a report to the next meeting addressing the issues which have been identified, with a view to making a recommendation to FES for approval, if the meeting is in agreement with that.
Any comments about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. We just need to establish what the costs are. And if I could ask Eugene, if we did nothing, would that result in reduced water for the allotment holders, or no water, or would it no water, right? So it's probably best to go ahead, but we need to establish what the costs are and the ongoing costs.
Just for clarification, because Sutherland Street is quite a compact site with small allotments, unlike Alkincoats where you've got quite large allotments and room for sheds and stuff like that, there isn't the capacity really on Sutherland Street, which means that the plot holders aren't able to harvest water from roofs and stuff like that. So there not being a water supply at Sutherland Street is quite critical for the plot holders. Whilst some have managed this year, I suspect they haven't managed. They've had to do a lot to compensate for the fact that there's been no water on site, which would probably mean taking water from home, which I can imagine in your car is quite difficult if you're not local.
And the tank situation will fix it.
What they're looking at is there is a tank there at the moment, but because it's a surface water stream, there's a lot of soil and sediment carried in the water as it goes into the tank, which settles at the bottom, which is where the feed for the water tap comes in. It doesn't affect the overflow as much because that's nearer the top of the tank. The suggestion is to put in an additional tank that the water will feed in first and settle there, and then will feed into the subsequent tank.
Just some clarification from me. Does the Borough Council have responsibility for that tank? I believe that they paid for the repairs last time. And I wondered whether that was going to be the case this time.
The tank is on Pendle Council land, and it served two purposes, really. One was to supply water to the allotment, and the other one was to deal with the excess surface water issue in that area, which, if it wasn't tanked or captured in the tank, would feed over the allotment land and into the builder's compound at the bottom of the allotment site. The last work that was undertaken was funded jointly, I think, from the Cone Area Committee and the Cone Allotments Committee for the provision of the overflow, which stopped the water going onto the allotment land, but it also stopped the water from going on the allotment land eventually when the water tap got blocked up. So we didn't do anything at that stage to solve the problem with the water supply to the allotment holders, just to stop the overflow water.
So what time scale are we looking at? Because obviously the plot holders are having difficulty watering their plots. So if we go through your proposal, what sort of time scale would we be looking at talking to the different committees?
It's difficult to estimate, given that this was something that was brought up we were trying to deal with last year, and we're now in this year, and we haven't got a resolution on it as yet. I think initially the assessment of the additional charges could be quite quick. If we speak to our Legionella contractor, I think they would give us a good idea of what sort of costs we might be looking at. So identifying that might be relatively quick. I've already spoken with Gina, and we're going to sit down and have a look at our budget commitments for this year, given the projects that we've agreed to undertake, and see where there may be monies to fund the initial work. And once we've done that, that will be included in the report. I don't think that would take too long. We would then fit that into the next available round of the FES meetings. Again, you're probably talking a month, 2 months maybe for that process, and depending on the outcome of that, sorry, I'm just going. Actually, no, sorry, because I've suggested that we make the report to the next meeting for the allotment committee to approve it. It would have to go to our next meeting, which isn't until, excuse me, just one moment, until the September, and then it would have to go to FES after that, so you're talking October.
Could we agree in principle tonight and remove the need for it to come back again for it to be accepted?
So then, but you could call an extraordinary allotment committee. You could call an extra one earlier if you've got the work to get done.
Yes, so we could call an extraordinary meeting. I think that we would want to do that.
September's too far.
Yeah, yeah. Is everybody, I would propose that. Is everybody in favour? Yeah, you've got a seconder? Yeah, and it's very strange with there only being 3 of us. Okay, is that everything on that that issue? Right, so we're on to notice boards. This seems also to be an issue that we've had quite a number of times on our agenda, and I know that last time we were talking about notice boards at Alkincoats. So again, I'll just send it over to our officer just to talk about the issues.
Yes, I probably overcomplicated things by the way I've put this on the agenda. I think at our previous meeting of the allotments committee, we were looking at projects where we could do improvements to allotment sites. And I think one of the allotment representatives mentioned that it would be nice to have a proper notice board at the main allotment site on Alkincoats. And I think the committee was in agreement to that. I then looked at the other allotment sites that we have as well, as to which might benefit from a notice boards. And as we've got several sites, there are several sites which might benefit from it, particularly the larger sites, so the sites which have multiple plots within them, of which I think I probably identified Broken Banks already has a notice board. George V, there are several allotments on there. South Valley will eventually be quite a significant site once we can relet those plots. And Sutherland Street, again, would be a good site or a good candidate for a notice board. I investigated the price of notice boards, and if we were to purchase 5 notice boards, we probably would be talking at a cost of somewhere in the region of £650 per board. So if you were to multiply that by the number of sites that could benefit from it, obviously it would be quite a significant commitment, and a commitment really that we don't have the funds to achieve on our current finances. I think we're in a unique position this year, possibly, because we're not running the full-scale allotment awards. that we could possibly fund one notice board from the new equipment and infrastructure budget and also the allotment marketing and promotions budget. That might cover one board this year, but that is only because we're not running the allotment awards in full process this year. Next year, we hope to be returning to running the allotment awards as previously, and so that money would be spent elsewhere effectively. So my proposal for the committee really is, if they're in agreement, that we proceed with the commitment to purchase a notice board for the Alkincote site, provided that comes in at a cost of less than or around about £700. We will have to pay a little bit more for the board because we're not doing a bulk purchase, but I think we should possibly be able to get one for that sort of price, and then to investigate proposals for additional boards when funding allows.
I thought that Alkincote's already had a notice board, because I've seen one up there, but it was quite a few years ago. It might have just disintegrated, I don't know. But you mentioned Broken Banks, but you didn't mention Carry Lane. Did you say that there was a notice board at Broken Banks?
Just Basil Street. I didn't include Carry Lane because, as you saw today, there's several entrances, and I felt that if you put the notice board on that path, it would be more likely vandalised than used.
That's fine.
I don't know whether anybody has the same feeling as me, but £700 for a notice board does seem to be quite a lot.
I agree.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Bill. Are you hearing us? Would you like to speak?
Yeah, I can hear you. I just say I think £700 for a notice board is quite a lot of money.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Is there any chance of getting anything cheaper or individually made for us? Or
Though that was the price for a board which was in corporate colour and also had Cone Town Council allotments at the top with the crest. So I wasn't going cheap, I'd have to say, but then my impression from the meeting was that they wanted something fitting the allotment site really, and that they wanted something that was in keeping and wouldn't detract from the allotment site. Just coming back to one of the things that Pat mentioned about Alkincote's having a notice board, I don't think it has a notice board. We have attached notices to the gates previously. What they do have at the bottom of the allotments is a hut, which I understand belonged to Cone Cultural Society along with the Alkincote's Allotment Association. I have emailed Michael previously, and we could possibly have access to that hut for storage, or we could possibly adapt, thinking out loud really, that we could possibly adapt a portion or a side of that hut for as a notice.
When I've gone up and seen those allotments, that there were notices put up somewhere, and I couldn't remember whether it was a notice on the wall of the outside of the hut or a notice board, but there were definitely notices up, you know, so
I think one of the problems of that site was that at one point there were 5 or 6 or 7 notices on the gate, and that was our concern. But personally, I don't think we should spend £700 on a notice board. But if anybody would like to propose that.
We need a good head joiner.
No.
I think a plain notice board would be about £500 or somewhere in that about. As I said, we did get a specific branded notice board with 2 posts to fix it on. If you were just going to fix a plain board to the side of the allotment hut at the bottom of Alkincoats, I imagine the cost would be significantly less because you're not paying for concreting posts in. If you want it enclosed, then that will cost a bit more. If you wanted a glass front on it to protect it from the element, that would cost more. If you just want a plain board that you can staple things to, that just says Alkincoats notices, then I think that would be considerably cheaper.
How do people feel?
Well, personally, I would say that if it's something that's going to be pinned to the side of the hut with something to stop rain wetting it through, then that's worth having. But most of these other sites haven't got anywhere like that, so it would be open to the elements. So we'd need glass on that. But I'm more worried about, I'm more worried about vandalism on the other sites, because people can get at them, most of them.
I think we're just talking about one at the moment, aren't we? Yeah, so just one, because it's quite a large site, so start with that. I mean, Bill, have you got any comments?
No, I'm keeping my little nose clean here and minding my own business. I'm listening.
Thank you. So, yeah, further investigations on small notice board attached to the hut with perhaps perspex or glass over. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right, we're on to item 11, and that is the allotment hedging, which is a little bit of my baby, really, because I would prefer hedging rather than fencing. But obviously, our allotment officer is going to tell us about the costings that would arise and the problems that may be arising from that.
Yes, allotment hedging. Again, I think we discussed this as projects we could possibly develop near the end of last financial year. We were looking at the Woodland Trust because they very helpfully did a hedging starter pack, which I think came in at about £38. Unfortunately, on further investigation, it didn't include the stakes or the supports and the tree protection that you would need for very young saplings, which was a additional £38. So there were a number of things which I think perhaps we need to consider in progressing this further. I think we've identified possibly broken banks as it's an area that we can do hedging, but I think we probably also need to confirm with existing plot holders, or hopefully when we get some more plot holders there, really that they're really behind the scheme and are in favour of the provision. One of my concerns is really the maintenance of the hedging, because We've already got several allotment sites where people have planted things like liandi and stuff like that, which is all right for when the tenant is looking after it. But if the plots change hands, there's not necessarily going to be the same commitment from the new plot holder to maintaining those sorts of hedging. And there's also the cost that would fall on the council if we were needed to maintain them. So as part of the project, I think we need to firstly identify that where we're putting out the plot holders would be in favour of it, and also identify what on costs there might be associated with the project, because we would be looking at having to cover the cost of planting the hedging, and we'd also have to look at the cost of maintaining it if it fell down to us to maintain it. At this moment in time, we are only responsible for maintaining. We are responsible for trees on allotment sites, and we have to. We're committed to make sure that those are safe. But we're already restricted on the amount of work that we can do to trees in terms of it has to be a matter of safety. That we do the work, and we don't just do it because it's blocking people's light. So there we're already restricted on what we can do in terms of our budgets. I think we need to address if those issues were likely to arise if we started with a hedging scheme and how we'd manage to deal with it. We might be looking at the hedges having to be cut twice a year, which for a run of hedging down the path at Broken Banks, for me, I would guess, I am only guessing, that it would probably take me 1 to 2 days' work to cut the hedges on both sides if it was out of control and had been left for some time. And then we'd have to dispose of whatever clippings there were. If we were doing that twice a year, it could mount up to quite a significant commitment. There may be ways around that if we offer the hedging to plot holders and make it quite clear that they are responsible for the maintenance of it, and it becomes part of the scheme and part of their agreement that they maintain it. That might limit our liabilities in that area. But in any case, before we initiate the scheme, we'd have to identify what those additional costs would be and really seek approval from FES to cover those costs out of our existing, already heavily committed budget, effectively. So I'm not saying we couldn't do it. I think there are ways we could do it, but I think the committee probably will need that. Or I should have got that information ready for the committee now, rather, so that you could make a proper decision. But we can put that right in that we can perhaps look at preparing a report for the next meeting to address those additional issues and costs, and make a proposed report to FES to approve any additional costs that might be ongoing out of the allotment committee's existing budget.
Any comments about that?
What's there at present, Eugene? Is there a fence there at the moment, or nothing?
Just posts.
Just posts, so there's no fence? No. And the starter kit, how high are the hedges when they arrive? So it's going to take years for it to actually grow to a height where it needs to be maintained? Yes?
Yes and no.
Yeah, but it's not going to be there it's not going to be there in 6 months, is it? It's not going to double in size in 6 months.
Out of the trees within the hedging kit, they are very small when they first come. So there'll be an issue of, which is why we need the additional protection of the stakes and the little wraparound things to keep them in good order whilst they do grow. But potentially, when they grow to maturity, I think whilst they range in heights at mature age, I think they range from 1.5 metres for dog rose to 15 metres for the hawthorn within the hedging. I can only go from my dad's hedge, and that seems to spring up quite quickly once once it's established, it will take a few years probably for it to be established. But in any case, they will be on costs, even if it's in 5-10 years' time.
Yeah, I think my own concern is vandalism when first
Yeah.
put in, people kicking about it. Not the plot holders, but antisocial behaviour.
Vandalism might be an issue. Obviously, Broken Bank site is enclosed by our perimeter fence, and it is reasonably secured. We established the central path. It's a gravel path with a wood border, so the path is quite significant. But we'd have to really manage the entrance through the hedge into the plots. At the moment, we've just got individual posts marking out the boundaries. We were thinking of putting some more posts in just to make it clear where the boundaries of those plots were. And maybe if we were going forward, then we'd probably do a section of hedging followed by a post to mark. That's where you go into your plot, another post, and then the rest of the hedging, doing it that way. But you are talking quite small for the initial hedging.
Yeah, I agree with Alice. I'd rather see hedging there than wide fence. But it's important, as you say, to ask the plot holders and also just get all the costs together, then we can make a decision. Thanks.
I put in a fence, a hedge 10 years ago, and it's only, 3 years ago when it was becoming a little bit unmanageable. So if we keep it low, then it shouldn't be a problem. But yeah, if you could bring that onto the next meeting or the emergency meeting. Right. Oh, Pat, sorry.
So, as it is now, we mark out the line for a fence, and it takes a few days to put a fence in. No, wait a minute. It takes a few days to build a fence, and it's there, isn't it? Now, we put these little plants in, and it takes 3 years maybe to make them that big. So there's no security as such, is there, for the first 3 years? Somebody might not keep it 3 years. Somebody might not want the living fence when they get an allotment. They might not want to have to do anything with it. Are they supposed to do anything with it, or is it totally down to the allotment committee, the management?
I think what is being proposed is that we ask the allotment holders whether they want it, but as you say, it might be new people that are coming on, in which case they will know that it's there and whether they accept that allotment on those terms. If you go to like Sutherland Street, they're not divided up, they're all open. So having the small hedging isn't going to be any different from those sites that are not like Alkincoats, that are all, or Nuts Lane, which are all individual allotments. It'll be open plan for a little time. That's what I'm assuming. And you usually plant one line and then in between, so it's like a double hedge.
Yeah.
But
So you're going to decide individually. You're not going to go saying to go, I don't know if you're talking about it, but if you're going to Broken Banks now, you've got fencing that side, but it could be all hedging this side. Are you going to go in and do it all, or do it as you let the allotments?
well, that's something we need to discuss with the allotment holders. But my view was that it would all be hedged down the pathway.
So you wouldn't do it till you've got an allotment holder for the allotment?
I think it's just those, it would be done, and we would ask those who are already on there whether they wanted it, and then next we will be saying, this is their plot, would you like it? It's going to have hedge. And if they don't, they'll go on to another site that doesn't have hedge.
Permission to speak, please. I make you jump, I'm sorry. When I took over Temple Street, I was so glad to take the plot. I wasn't bothered about the hedge. As time went on, I got the committee to agree to it being trimmed down to a reasonable level, and now I maintain it myself. Once a month, I can clip it 3 sides, top, middle, and get it all sorted out. Takes me about an hour and a half. It's quite a big hedge. Well, I was glad to get the allotment, and I'm not bothered about the hedge.
Brilliant, thank you for that. So we'll get costings for the next meeting, and all the other information. Yeah. Everybody happy about that? Yeah. Okay, so we're moving on to item 12, allotment committee documents, Microsoft Teams. Yes, I was note that I was on Microsoft Teams. Would you like to explain that for us?
Yes. At the last meeting, it was suggested that we might put some allotment documents on Microsoft Teams, which is basically a secure sharing council site, or it effectively becomes that, where we can share documents relating to plots. At the moment, whilst I have access to any of the allotment documents, because I've got access to the council system, the only access councillors, I think, generally have is through the website, where we've got the allocations policy, council meetings, allotment committee meetings. So it's quite limited. But within Microsoft Teams, we're able to share other documents, which I think it might be useful for those members of the committee who want to use them to have access to. At this moment in time, we are only talking about councillors having access through the Microsoft Teams. I set it up last week and I started putting documents on it earlier today, and going through it. Whilst some of the documents need updating to make sure that they're current, I think it could be useful for sharing basic information about allotment sites, particularly in terms of the site plans, but perhaps more importantly for committee members, I've started putting the allotment inspections by site on there. So it gives you the opportunity, before you go out and visit a plot, to have a look at it, to see what action has been taken on that plot in terms of inspections previously, and where perhaps some of the plots that weren't being cultivated are, and whether or not we already know about them. So I think that would be quite useful for the committee to know, quite useful for the committee to be assured that the inspections are being undertaken, because they'd have access to the records of it. And I'm sure there are going to be other documents along the way that we find that would be quite useful for committee members to have access to.
Yeah, totally agree.
Any comments about that, Pat? No. So, item 13, allocation policy review.
Yes. We're supposed to review our policies each year. And I was quite surprised reviewing this one, how many spelling mistakes there were in it. But a lot of the amendments, which are highlighted in yellow on the documents that I've sent out for the allocations policy, are just minor changes, corrections to grammar, and don't actually change the meaning or the purpose of each section. But there are a couple of exceptions to that. In terms of allocating from the waiting list, the policy is and always has been that we would allocate to the person who's been on the waiting list the longest. However, generally speaking, most councils would consider if someone was owed money to the council or was in breach of a previous agreement or undertaking to the council, that they wouldn't necessarily be considered in the same way. It wouldn't necessarily mean that they were not allowed to apply for an allotment, but it would certainly mean that the committee would have to consider whether or not it was suitable to allow them on the waiting list. So that's why under section 2 of the allocations policy waiting list, item C, I've inserted that the applicant must not owe money or be in breach of any agreement or undertaking to Colne Town Council. Just really a matter of, I think, of good housekeeping, which I hope that the committee would be agreeable to. The second amendment there, we've inserted Colne residents, is just really to clarify why the people who are living outside the Colne Town Council boundaries would have to pay 120% of the set fee rate. So instead of 36p per metre, they'd have to pay 43p per metre, I think, on current rates. And that was because, as the committee said at the time, Colne residents pay a contribution through the precept to the provision of allotment service, whereas people living outside the Colne Town Council still pay a precept to their local parish or town council, but that money doesn't come to Colne Town Council. So it just reflects that there is a subsidy from Colne Town Council already within the provision of the allotment service. General allocations, I've made a couple of minor amendments here. I've included that in the general allocations, item B, the plot offered complies with the specified requirements stated by the applicant. I think it previously said on the application form, but quite often applicants will put in an application form and may amend it after discussions of whether a site is suitable or not. So it's a combination of what was on the application form and what they may have stated.
It's all logged in writing.
Yes, that's logged on our system. The application form is obviously a physical thing, and also the notes from conversations with applicants is recorded as well in summary on there. I've added under C that transfers really are dealt with in this, because previously, whilst we'd accepted that allotment plot holders could do transfers, it wasn't actually written into the document where that occurred, and it's under the, if we're not doing it as a management transfer because we've got specific reasons for doing it, if they're just wanting a move and there's no other grounds that would qualify for a different category, it would be dealt with under the general allocations in date order of submission, as with other applicants. So it's just clarifying that bit being made clear. The refusal of offers, the amendment there is really just to ensure that the offer is suitable according to the requirements that the applicant has specified prior to the offer being made, which I think would be reasonable. The last page, the changes on that are just clerical, since we no longer have a chief executive officer but a town clerk. That's been amended. I've also slightly amended the reinstatement in terms of the termination and transfers. I've said that such reinstatements would be at the discretion of the allotment officer, where previously I think that's been at the discretion of the chief executive officer. and the rest is just minor changes again on that. So those are the proposed amendments to the allocation policy, if the committee is in agreement to that.
Any comments about that? So shall we propose that that goes ahead? Is there anybody who can second that? Yep, and we're all in agreement.
We'll take it in turns, Pat.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we've got the livestock consent policy review.
Yes, again, most of the changes are in relation to just correcting the grammar and some of the spellings within it. As mentioned previously, Section 5 standard conditions for consent, there is just an error still in there, unfortunately, which with the committee's agreement I'd like to take out, which is Section E should read the Royal Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Birds, or SPCB, just to clarify that one. I've changed F because we had some discussion in relation to a previous plot which had various types of fowl on it, some ducks and chickens and other things. That in our policy we had previously insisted that all fowl be fed by a treadle feeder, but apparently that wouldn't be appropriate for all fowl. Things like geese may not have, because of the length of the neck, and also I think ducks because of them being ground feeders, I believe. Treadle feeders wouldn't work for those. So just to make it workable, I've just specified chickens in that section. In general restrictions and exceptions, I have added the word cockerel in A, whilst it always read that the limit would be to a maximum number of 6 hens and no other livestock. Given recent discussions, I thought it was probably best to underline really that cockerels are not permitted within that, yeah. So that's why I've included that. The change I've made to exemptions from livestock restrictions is an additional condition. We have always had on that the livestock for which consent is being sought have been kept on the plot by the plot holder since April 2018 with the written consent of the council, I believe. So though the written consent I might have added in this time round, and we also had B where the plot holders has complied fully with the obligations of the allotment agreement and the requirements under which the consent had previously been granted. I've added into this because I think when we've discussed it previously in relation to pigeons, that it's almost like part of a cultural heritage, and that the committee may want to consider cases where there may be good cultural and social reasons for supporting an application from livestock which wouldn't necessarily be kept on an allotment site. But in doing that, I thought it might be as wise to recognise that, or to ensure that the person who was wishing to do that was part of a professional body or association in relation to that activity, which I think isn't unreasonable, in that they're not just keeping them as a hobby, but they have a professional or cultural interest in the keeping of that particular livestock. The other changes on the livestock consent request just reflect the previous recognition that the livestock being kept is kept in accordance with the recommendations of a recognised body. In this case, we've suggested the Royal Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Birds and the Royal Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. There may be other bodies, depending on the livestock that is being sought to be kept. And that is the amendments I'm suggesting or proposing to the committee.
Everybody happy with those amendments?
Yep. Yep.
Brilliant. I've just got one clarification. On the register of livestock consents, there's quite a number of implied. Does that mean that they haven't actually filled in a form, but they've had agreement?
Perhaps should have, because this is actually an amendment as well, which I should have mentioned. This is, I've added to this the date that consent is granted and also the date that the consent would expire. I've also amended it to reflect recent changes where people have given up plots. So the plot, the consent disappears once the tenant gives the plot back effectively. So that's effectively why it's withdrawn. You will find that most of the consents are implied, which was as a result of the fact that, unfortunately, there's no evidence that consent has been formally granted by the allotment committee or previous allotment management bodies for most, if not all, of the allotment plots. The fact that people have had livestock on those, not all, there are some specific ones where people have written in for consent, particularly bees and things like that. But most of them, because they've had the animals on the plot for a period of time, at the time that we were introducing the livestock policy, I did an inspection of the plots to find out which ones currently have livestock on, and presumed at that time that if they had livestock on, it would be reasonable for that person to have applied for consent, in spite of the fact that we didn't have a record of that consent. So they don't necessarily have consent, but the fact that they've had the animals on the plot for a significant period of time implies that the allotment committee has agreed to them continuing to do so. Otherwise, we would have had to write to them to advise them it's a breach of the consent requirements. So that's why there's so many with the implied consent. And the expiry date is really the date that we'd agreed that existing consents would come to an end in any case, which is January the 1st, 2023. Where all implied consents will come to an end and plot holders on those plots would have to reapply for consent, and we would encourage plot holders to do that earlier rather than later. As we've said, or as the committee has said, really that consents will not be automatic and it will be subject to the conditions on the plot, the conditions that the plot holder has kept the allotment, and also the number of other livestock, and the proximity to residents, and other issues which it would be reasonable for the allotment committee to take into account when granting consent or not.
Right, now we've got our updates on the allotments from our allotment officer.
Yes, just very briefly. We've had 2 allocations, one on Highgarth, one on Basil Street. We still have another plot on Basil Street to allocate. We've now got 2 vacancies on Sutherland Street, which I have yet to allocate. And we've also had a vacancy on Carry Lane, which is the plot that myself and Alice and Pat had a look at earlier on today, which is quite overgrown and would benefit by some work being done to it, with a view really to split it up into probably 3 or 4 separate plots and allocating it on that basis. But we need to do some initial tidy up work to see what's actually on the ground, because it's that overgrown at the moment. We do know that there's an amount of waste at the bottom of the plot and at the top of the plot, which will be hard to remove from the site, and is something that we will have to look at what we do about managing that. I've served a number of notices in relation to non-compliance with the allotment agreement, which is basically which includes plots on Carry Lane and a plot on Temple Street.
Hooray. Sorry. I'm shouting hooray.
It wasn't you, Bill. It wasn't you. And some plots on Alkincote. I've also sent some pre-notice letters to a couple of people to advise them that when I come to do the formal inspection, it's likely that they would fail that inspection and need to do something. That has worked really quite well this time round in terms of encouraging people to do some work on their plots, and also perhaps solidifying in people's mind whether or not they wish to keep the allotment or whether it has in fact come too much for them. So that has had some results and is a process that will be ongoing, obviously. We've also had some movement on the land transfer of the allotment sites from Pendleborough Council to us, which, as you know, we are trying to push as quickly as reasonably possible. Obviously, we are prioritising South Valley because of the access arrangements there, and we have received the plans from Pendleborough Council for that, which I confirm are correct. I've been up today to check those boundaries, and I've just got to reconcile that with the plan that's been sent. So I'm hoping that we can progress that more quite quickly. And thank you, Naomi, for progressing that with the Pendleborough Council on our behalf.
Sorry.
Thanks, Naomi. Just a question about Alkincote. You know, we received the email from Ben Hewson regarding one of the plots. I was in Alkincote on Friday, so it was the first time I visited, you know, the allotments. So I had a look there. And his complaint is the trees which aren't actually on our land. But looking at the trees, they're actually very, very high. So I was just, you know, wondering, I know you replied back to him, Alice, and said that would investigate it. I don't know if anything can be done about it, Eugene, or whether it'd have to be referred to LCC.
Yes, he originally was concerned about the trees on the boundary of the allotment, and I went up to investigate. And it's, whilst there are some trees growing into the allotment at quite a low level, which makes access to the bottom boundary quite difficult, the majority trees are on, I suspect, Highways England land or Pendleborough Council land. I'm not quite sure. Which effectively means, I mean, our policy would in any case be only really doing trees which are of a danger to the general public in the first instance, because of the funding or the cost of doing work, which would be in addition to that. Notwithstanding the fact that the trees weren't on our land, and that we couldn't do any work to them, I did ask one of our tree contractors working in Alkincote Park to have a quick look at the trees on my behalf as a gesture of goodwill, which he very kindly did. And he identified 2 possible trees with issues, neither of which were adjacent to our plot holders' land on the boundary. So it was elsewhere in that wooded area, both of which I referred to the Pendle Council tree officer for them to take forward if necessary. So they've been inspected by a tree surgeon. They're not unwell. It's just that they are very big. They're not on our land. And whilst we might, well, we can understand his concern that it's blocking light, but unfortunately, I don't think the allotment committee has the power really to do anything about that situation.
Apart from just to refer it on.
Yes, yeah.
Will you be replying back to the plot holder and just let him know what's been done?
I have already spoken to the plot holder. I think he already knows what we've done. Several months ago. Yeah. It's a problem that's not going away, isn't it? Really. So it's of concern to him, and I think he was wondering at one stage whether or not the allotment committee would reduce his rent, because he's saying he can't grow on part of it, which is. I can accept that he has difficulty growing on that plot, but he has held that plot for a number of years. And also I think when we've discussed this previously at the allotment committee, people have said each allotment has its own unique issues, of which trees can be one of them, really, in this case. He has put in a transfer request, and I will look at if we can meet his request to move to a different plot when a suitable plot comes available and he meets the criteria.
Well, I went up to see him on Saturday and discussed the whole thing again. And I think he's quite pleased that we are taking an interest. But perhaps another letter could go to him just to say what the conclusions are. And he was very, very keen on getting a transfer. So if we could move that on any way we can, that would be great. Is there any vacant plots? Or are there any vacant plots? No, not at the moment. So that's something to consider. Also, you mentioned that Sutherland Street had two empty allotments. Do we have a waiting list?
Yes, we've got a reasonably healthy waiting list, I think, for Sutherland Street. And
when were the plots made vacant?
Probably, off the top of my head, probably this weekend.
So they've only just... Yeah, that's great. I just wondered... Bill, did you want to say something?
No, all I'm getting is a rattle from microphone being moved from one to another.
Can you hear it out, the microphones?
I can hear it, every single move.
Perhaps we don't need them then.
No, it's only when the microphone is moving.
Okay. Yeah, it's very strange. All right, so now we're on to items for future month's agenda. Now, if it doesn't go on the agenda, we can't talk about it. So it's really important to get things on the agenda now. We don't have to do it particularly now, but it's got to go onto an agenda before our next meeting. Otherwise, we're just not able to talk about them or make any real decisions. So, Bill, if you've got anything that needs to go on the agenda, just let Eugene know.
Just for clarification, it's simply because we're doing meetings like this. It's important that people have the opportunity to see what we're discussing and are clear what we're discussing in terms of whether or not they have any views on that, because they may wish to come and comment. So I'll be working with Gina quite a lot on preparing the next summons for the allotment committee meeting, because we need to be quite clear what decisions what we are discussing and what decisions we need to make at each point in those, just so that everyone is clear and people have the opportunity to comment.
Okay, I think we're on to the date and time of the next regular meeting, which according to these notes is the 14th of September 2021, but I believe we will probably call another meeting about Sutherland Street to get them with water. Okay,